I should have understood what was happening the first time she smiled at herself in the mirror before leaving and didn't even ask if I wanted to come. That was the part that stayed with me later. Not the words she used. Not the calm tone. Not even the way she made it sound reasonable. It was that look on her face. Like something inside her had woken up again. And whatever it was, it had nothing to do with me. Her name was Kayla, and by the time all of this started, we had been together a little over 3 years. Long enough to have routines. Long enough to stop asking certain questions because you think you already know the answers. I was 29, working steady, the kind of guy who liked predictability more than I admitted. Kayla was 27, smart, warm when she wanted to be, and the kind of woman who could light up a room without trying too hard. For most of our relationship, that light had felt like home to me. Then, little by little, it stopped feeling like home. Nothing dramatic happened at first. That was the worst part. There was no obvious fight. No huge betrayal. No moment where I could point and say that was where everything changed. It was more like watching a room grow darker so slowly you didn't notice until you were already squinting. She started getting quieter at night. Not angry. Just somewhere else. I would be talking about work, or bills, or some stupid thing I saw online, and she would nod at the right times without really being there. She still sat next to me on the couch, but there was a distance in her that made the cushions between us feel wider than they were. If I put a hand on her leg, sometimes she left it there, and sometimes she shifted like she barely noticed. If I kissed her, she kissed me back, but it felt like she was checking something off a list. I told myself it was stress. That was my first mistake. I explained everything away because I loved her, and because the alternative felt bigger and uglier than I wanted to face. She had been complaining about work more. Her manager was impossible. Her hours were weird. One of her friends had gone through a messy breakup, and Kayla had been taking long calls late at night, listening to the same stories over and over. Life gets heavy sometimes. People get tired. I wanted to be the guy who understood that. So I gave her room without calling it room. I cooked more. I asked less. I tried not to take it personally when she said she had a headache or when she went to bed early with her phone in her hand and her back turned slightly away from me. Even then, there were signs. Small ones. The kind you can only see clearly in reverse. She started caring about her appearance in strange, uneven ways. Around me, she looked comfortable, almost careless. Oversized shirts. Hair tied up. No makeup. That didn't bother me by itself. We'd been together long enough to be real around each other. But then sometimes, out of nowhere, she'd spend extra time in the bathroom before going somewhere that apparently had nothing to do with me. Not a full transformation, not at first. Just enough to notice. A little more attention to her hair. Better jeans. Perfume she claimed she was just trying again because she found the bottle in a drawer. The first time I really felt something cold move through me was on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were ours in a boring, normal way. We usually ordered takeout, watched something half interesting, and made fun of it together. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. That afternoon, I texted her asking what she wanted for dinner, and she took almost 2 hours to reply. When she finally did, she said she was exhausted and wanted a night to herself. The wording was polite, but distant. Like I was making a reservation instead of talking to my girlfriend. I didn't argue. I said that was fine. When I got home, she was already there. The apartment was quiet, and for a second I thought maybe she really was resting. Then I heard the bathroom cabinet close and saw the light under the door. A few minutes later she came out, and I just stood there holding my keys longer than I needed to. She was dressed up. Not formal. Not like a wedding or an event. But dressed in a way that made no sense if she was staying in or taking a walk to clear her head. Her makeup was soft but deliberate. Her hair was down, brushed out in that way she knew I liked, except she wasn't looking at me. She was checking herself in the hall mirror, adjusting one earring, smoothing the side of her dress over her hip like the opinion that mattered was waiting somewhere else. I asked if she was going out. She said she just needed to get out for a little while and feel like herself again. That phrase landed strangely. Feel like herself again. I nodded like I understood, because I wanted to. Because I thought maybe this was one of those moments where if I pushed, I'd become the problem. She said lately she felt swallowed by routine. By expectations. By always being somebody's girlfriend, somebody's employee, somebody's daughter, somebody's friend. She said she needed space to breathe and reconnect with the part of herself that existed before everyone wanted something from her. It was the kind of explanation that makes you feel selfish for reacting badly to it. So I told her okay. I told her I got it. I even said something supportive, Something about how everyone needs that sometimes. She thanked me, kissed my cheek like I was a relative seeing her off at the airport, and left. That should have been the end of it for the night. A weird conversation, maybe, but not the beginning of a collapse. Instead, I sat alone on the couch with the TV on mute and kept replaying the image of her at the mirror. It bothered me in a way I couldn't explain without sounding insecure. It wasn't that she went out without me. People do that. It wasn't even that she looked good. She always looked good. It was the energy behind it. The care. The anticipation. I hadn't seen that version of her in a while, and realizing it still existed but didn't seem to belong to me anymore did something ugly to my stomach. She came home after midnight. Not drunk. Not guilty. Just brighter than she had looked in weeks. That was what I noticed most. She moved through the apartment with a loose, easy kind of happiness she hadn't brought into a room with me in months. She said the night had helped. Said she felt lighter. I asked where she went, and she answered vaguely enough to say she had been out without really saying with who or doing what. A bar downtown. Walked around a little. Met up with people. Nothing important. Nothing important. I wanted to ask why space suddenly looked like eyeliner and heels and a smile she forgot to wear around me. But I didn't. I told myself not to make one night into a whole story. Then it happened again that weekend. And then again the next week. Soon, space became a phrase that floated through our apartment like perfume. She needed space after work. Space on weekends. Space to reset. Space to reconnect. Space to feel like herself again. Every time she said it, I tried to be understanding. Every time I tried, something in me felt a little more stupid. Because while she was asking for distance from me, she seemed to be moving with more purpose everywhere else. She started buying clothes again. Nothing extreme, but enough for me to notice new tops hanging in the closet with tags missing. She switched perfumes. She got her nails done after months of not caring. She began keeping her phone face down more often, not dramatically, just naturally, like someone protecting a private world they had every intention of keeping private. And the strangest part was this: she wasn't cruel. If she had been cruel, it might have been easier. She was gentle. Calm. Almost tender in the way people are when they've already left emotionally and don't want to deal with the mess of saying it out loud. She still asked if I had eaten. Still reminded me to grab my jacket if it was cold out. Still moved around me like we were intact, while every day I felt something slipping further out of reach. One Tuesday night, she came out of the bedroom wearing a black dress I hadn't seen in over a year. I remembered that dress because the first time she wore it, we went to a rooftop bar for my birthday. She spent half that night with her hand on my arm, leaning into me like there was nowhere else she wanted to be. Back then, I used to catch other guys looking at her and feel lucky. That night, standing in our apartment doorway, she looked just as stunning. Maybe more. And she looked right past me. I asked if she was meeting friends. She said yes, but there was a pause before she answered. Just a second. Tiny. Almost invisible. The kind of pause that means the truth had to step aside so the edited version could go first. Then she picked up her purse, checked her reflection one last time, and left with a smile that never once turned toward me. A few minutes later, as I stood in the kitchen pretending I wasn't waiting to hear the elevator doors close, her phone lit up on the counter where she had accidentally left it. I wasn't trying to snoop. But when the screen flashed, I saw one line before it went dark again. It wasn't a name I recognized. And it wasn't something a woman sends when she's just out trying to feel like herself again. I stared at the dark screen for a few seconds after the message disappeared, like it might light back up and explain itself. It didn't. I told myself there were innocent reasons for it. Coworker. Friend. Group plan. Something taken out of context by a brain that was already halfway into panic. But that only worked for about 10 seconds. Because the real problem wasn't the message by itself. It was how perfectly it fit everything else. Kayla had been asking for distance from me while somehow becoming more alive for whatever waited outside our apartment. I walked around the kitchen pretending I was doing something useful. Opened the fridge. Closed it. Rinsed a glass that was already clean. The phone stayed on the counter between me and the sink like a test I wasn't supposed to fail. I didn't touch it. Not because I was above it. Mostly because I was afraid of what I'd see, and maybe even more afraid that I'd see nothing clear enough to justify how bad I already felt. A few minutes later, she came back in. That was the first strange part. She almost never forgot her phone. Not recently. Lately it had become something she carried from room to room, even for stupid little things like getting water or checking the mail. But now she stepped into the apartment with an odd kind of quickness, like she had realized the mistake halfway to wherever she was going and turned around before the elevator got too far. She looked at the counter first. Then at me. I acted like I had barely noticed. She picked up the phone, slipped it into her purse, and said she had forgotten something important. Her tone was casual, maybe a little too casual. Then she was gone again before I could decide whether to say anything. That tiny moment sat in my chest the rest of the night. It wasn't proof of anything. I knew that. But suspicion doesn't need proof to grow. It just needs repetition. Enough small things in a row, and your mind starts building a picture before you're ready to look at it. After that, I began noticing details I had probably missed before. Kayla started guarding her time in ways that didn't match the story she was telling me. If she needed space to breathe, I would have expected quiet. Solitude. Long walks. Maybe nights with girlfriends she'd been neglecting. But what I saw instead looked curated. Planned. She wasn't drifting. She was getting ready. Her nights out had a rhythm to them. Not every night, because that would have been too obvious. But enough that I started to feel a pattern forming underneath the randomness. Thursday. Saturday. Then Tuesday. Sometimes Friday. Usually the nights when I was most likely to be home and available, which somehow made it sting more. I would ask if she wanted to grab dinner, watch something, go out ourselves, and she would tell me she felt emotionally drained or needed to be alone with her thoughts. Then an hour later she'd be in front of the mirror with her makeup bag open and music playing softly from her phone. The weirdest part was how light she seemed during those little routines. Around me, she moved like someone carrying a weight she couldn't put down. Around those nights, she looked relieved. Focused. Energized. It was like watching the old version of her return in pieces, except those pieces never showed up for us. I started testing the edges of things without making it obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just small questions. I'd ask where she was headed, and she'd answer with broad, blurry words. Out for a bit. Meeting people. Just getting out. Sometimes she mentioned friends, but the names changed oddly, or came after a pause that felt like she was choosing something safe to say. If I asked how her night was afterward, she gave me summaries with no shape to them. Fun. Needed that. Good to get out. Same kind of answers every time, like she had learned that specifics were dangerous. Once, I asked whether her friend Nina had been with her. I only asked because Nina had been part of her life forever, and in the past Kayla used Nina's name naturally when they did anything together. But that night there was another one of those tiny pauses. Then she said yes, maybe later, she wasn't sure. The whole night had been loose and last minute. That answer bothered me more than a straight lie would have. Because nobody is half sure whether they spent the night with one of their closest friends. Either Nina was there or she wasn't. Either the story happened or it didn't. But Kayla said it in that soft, tired voice that made it sound mean to keep asking. So I let it go in front of her. The next afternoon, I ran into Nina completely by accident. I was grabbing coffee before work, and she was in line near the pickup counter. We weren't close, but we knew each other well enough to stop and talk. She asked how I was. Asked how Kayla was doing. Normal stuff. I kept my tone neutral and mentioned that Kayla seemed to be going out more lately, probably trying to decompress. Nina gave me a look I still remember. It wasn't guilt. Not exactly. More like confusion that she corrected too late. Then she said she hoped that was helping Kayla and changed the subject so fast it almost gave me whiplash. That was the moment something inside me hardened. Because now it wasn't just a feeling anymore. There was a gap between what Kayla was saying and what the world around her seemed to know. A small gap, but real. The kind that makes you stop asking whether you're insecure and start asking what you're not being told. After that, I became quieter. Not colder. Not confrontational. Just observant. I noticed that she had started charging her phone screen down on her side of the bed. I noticed she angled it away more often when typing. I noticed she smiled at it differently sometimes, not the distracted smile of scrolling, but the contained kind. The kind people get when they're trying not to react too much in front of someone. I noticed she had started caring about details she used to brush off with me. Matching earrings. Better shoes. A different kind of perfume than the one she wore to work. Not stronger, just newer. Chosen. One Friday, I told her I had made dinner reservations for the next night at a place she used to love. She thanked me, but then said she had already promised one of her friends she would be out. That landed harder than it should have, mostly because I had told her about the reservation only to see if there would be any hesitation. There wasn't. She didn't ask to move it. Didn't look torn. Just apologized in a calm, Detached way people do when your disappointment is no longer their main concern. I canceled the reservation and told myself that was normal too. Couples go through phases. People need freedom. Not every bad feeling means betrayal. But I was reaching for explanations that kept getting thinner. The next week, another small thing happened. She came home late on a Wednesday, kicked off her shoes by the door, and headed straight to the bathroom. Her purse was half open when she set it on the chair near the kitchen. I wasn't trying to go through it. I need that to be clear. I still wanted some version of myself I could respect when this was over, whatever this turned out to be. But as I passed by, I saw the edge of the receipt. A bar receipt. Again, that alone meant nothing. What mattered was the timestamp. It was from the night she had told me she was too drained to go anywhere and just needed to drive around and clear her head. According to the receipt, she had been nowhere near driving around. She had been downtown, at a place with live music and overpriced cocktails, and she had been there long enough for the bill to climb higher than it would for one drink in silence. I put the receipt back exactly where it had been. That night, lying next to her in bed, I realized I had crossed into a different stage of the story without meaning to. I was no longer trying to keep us comfortable. I was trying to reconcile two versions of the same woman. The one in our apartment said she felt smothered by routine, exhausted by expectations, unsure of herself, in need of room. The other one was dressing carefully, moving mysteriously, guarding her phone, lying badly, and coming home with a brightness she no longer shared with me. A few days later, the inconsistency got even worse. She told me she needed Saturday completely to herself. Said she wanted a reset day, no pressure, no social battery drained by anyone, just time alone. I said fine. I even left the apartment for most of the afternoon so she could have it. That evening, I stopped by a grocery store on the other side of town on my way home. And there she was. Not alone. I didn't see who she was with clearly enough to identify them. Just the back of a man near her cart, tall, dark jacket, leaning in slightly while she laughed at something. Not polite laughter. Not casual. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. Open. Easy. Unaware. I froze before they saw me. Or maybe before she saw me. I'm still not sure which possibility hit harder. By the time I got outside again, my pulse was hammering so hard it made everything feel thin and distant. I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel, telling myself I might be wrong, that I needed more than one partial glimpse and 100 suspicions stitched together into fear. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Kayla. She said she was spending the evening alone, turning her phone off for a while, and asked me not to worry if she went quiet. That was the first moment I stopped wondering whether something was wrong. And started wondering how long it had already been going on. After that text, I stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt. Not out loud. Not in some dramatic way. I didn't confront her in the grocery store parking lot. I didn't call her and ask who the man was. I didn't send some angry message that would only warn her I was finally paying attention. I went home, sat in the dark for a while, and understood something I had been trying not to understand for weeks. Kayla wasn't confused. She was managing me. That realization did something to me. It took all the soft explanations I had been using to protect her and burned through them in one night. Up until then, part of me still wanted to believe this was emotional distance, maybe selfishness, maybe cowardice, but not deliberate deception. That text ended that version of the story. She had looked me in the face, said she needed to be alone, and then sent me a message built to keep me from asking questions while she spent time with someone else. Once I saw that, everything else changed. I became careful. That's the word for it. Not sneaky. Not obsessive. Just careful. I started treating the situation like something fragile and dangerous, because that's what it was. If I moved too early, I'd get half-truths and tears and some rewritten version of events designed to make me feel controlling. If I stayed quiet long enough, maybe I'd finally see the shape of what was actually happening. So I watched. The first thing I did was stop filling in the blanks for her. When Kayla said she was going out, I didn't help complete the story in my head. I just listened to the words exactly as she said them. And once I started doing that, I noticed how little she really gave me. Every explanation was built from soft language. Vague phrases. No edges, no names, no details that could be checked. She wasn't technically telling me much of anything. She was creating just enough sound to cover silence. That alone made me angrier than I expected. Because for weeks, I had been working hard to be understanding while she had been working hard to stay unaccountable. I began keeping track of small things in my head. Not in some notebook. Nothing that formal. Just patterns. What nights she went out. How long she stayed. What she wore. Whether she seemed tense before leaving or excited. Whether she came home guarded or glowing. I paid attention to how often she mentioned the same people, which wasn't often, and how rarely any of those people seemed to exist in real life around the stories she told. A pattern formed fast. The nights she said she needed space were usually the nights she put the most effort into how she looked. The nights she claimed to be emotionally drained were often the nights she came home the latest. And the more she insisted this was about finding herself, the less any of it looked like solitude. I also started paying attention to her phone habits, because it was impossible not to. She was smarter about it now, or maybe I was just finally seeing it clearly. If she left the room, the phone went with her. If a message came in while we were together, she checked it with a quick downward glance and then shifted the screen away before replying. If I happened to be near her while she was typing, her body angled almost automatically. It had become muscle memory. One night on the couch, she was scrolling through something and smiled without meaning to. It was a real smile. Small, private, immediate. I asked what was funny, and she said it was nothing, just something dumb online. Then she locked the screen right away and leaned back against the cushion like that should end it. Maybe a month earlier, I would have let it end there. Instead, I noticed that she never showed me the dumb thing. Never offered the screen. Never tried to include me in the moment at all. And that was the part that mattered. Her life used to spill toward me naturally. Even stupid things. Memes. Bad takes. Random messages. Now every little thing was filtered before it reached me, as if I no longer had access to the unedited version. The next real break came through something stupidly small. Laundry. She had started doing her own loads separately more often, which by itself didn't mean much. But one Sunday morning, while I was carrying a basket toward the washer, a receipt slipped from the pocket of one of her jackets and landed face up on the floor. Different bar. Different night. Same area downtown. And the timestamp matched one of the evenings she had told me she was staying with Nina and a couple of girls from work. I stood there staring at that narrow strip of paper longer than I should have. Not because it proved cheating. It didn't. What it proved was lying. Repeated, casual, deliberate lying. That mattered almost more, because once somebody gets comfortable lying about where they are, the rest becomes a question of degree, not kind. I put the receipt back where I found it. I still wasn't ready to show my hand. A few days later, I made a choice that would have seemed paranoid to the version of me from earlier in the relationship. I checked our shared tablet. It was old, mostly used for streaming, recipes, random browsing. We had both signed into things on it over the years, and most of the time neither of us even thought about it. I wasn't expecting much. In fact, part of me hoped for nothing. Something embarrassing and ordinary. A harmless explanation. Proof that I was building monsters out of distance and insecurity. What I found wasn't a confession. It was worse in a way, because it was incomplete. Her email was still logged in. Not fully active, not open and exposed, but enough that I could see fragments and notifications and recent activity. Most of it was boring. Promotions. Work junk. Appointment reminders. Then one thing caught my eye, a reservation confirmation from a restaurant I recognized downtown. 2 guests. Friday at 8:30. The same Friday she had told me she was meeting Nina and another friend for drinks after work. I just sat there holding the tablet, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. A restaurant like that wasn't impossible for friends, but nothing about it felt casual. It wasn't the kind of place Kayla and Nina went for drinks. It was low lighting, hard reservation, expensive wine, date night kind of place. Kayla knew that because we had once talked about going there ourselves and decided to save it for some future occasion that, apparently, had found room in her schedule for someone else. I checked the date twice. Then 3 times. Same night. Same window of time. That was the moment suspicion turned into structure. Not proof, not yet, but structure. The pieces were starting to connect in a way that no longer left much room for innocent interpretation. The careful close. The vague stories. The brightness when she returned. The lies about being alone. The false mention of Nina. The downtown receipts. The reservation for 2. There was someone. I still didn't know who. I still didn't know whether this was emotional, physical, new, or already far enough along that I was the only one still pretending the relationship existed in the same form. But for the first time, I felt close to the truth instead of just haunted by it. After that, I began watching for names. Names are hard to hide forever. They slip through in notifications, contacts, stories that get told too quickly. So I listened harder when her phone buzzed. I looked, without making it obvious, when the screen lit in dark rooms. Most of the time, She kept it angled away too well. But once, very late, after she had fallen asleep with the phone still in her hand, a notification flashed before the screen dimmed. I only saw part of it. A first name. Evan. I didn't know any Evan in her world. Not from work, not from her old college stories, not from the friends she actually talked about around me. Just a name, hanging there for half a second before the screen went dark again. The next morning, I acted normal. So did she. That made it worse. I spent the day replaying every conversation from the last 2 months, pulling at threads. Had she ever mentioned a new coworker? A friend of a friend? Someone from the gym? There had been a few passing references to people in groups, blurred names thrown into stories that went nowhere, but nothing solid enough to land on. It was like she had been scrubbing the details from her life before bringing them home. Then, 2 nights later, I got the first thing that felt real enough to touch. Kayla was in the shower. Her phone was charging on the dresser. I wasn't standing over it. I wasn't waiting for it. But the screen lit up bright enough to catch my eye in the reflection of the mirror. This time I saw more than a name. It was a message preview from Evan. It said he couldn't stop thinking about last time. And underneath it, before the screen went black, I saw just enough of Kayla's earlier reply to know there had been a last time at all. I didn't move when I saw the message. That's what I remember most clearly now. Not some dramatic rush of anger. Not a burst of adrenaline. Just stillness. He couldn't stop thinking about last time. That was the line. Simple. Casual. Familiar. The kind of message people send when they're already past the line and no longer pretending they're standing near it. I stared at the screen until it went dark, then looked away fast, like the phone had caught me instead of the other way around. In the bathroom, I could still hear the shower running. Kayla was humming softly to herself, the same absent little tune she used when she was relaxed. And that sound almost did me in more than the message did, because it meant she was comfortable. Comfortable enough to shower in our apartment with another man's words lighting up on her dresser. Comfortable enough to think I still didn't know. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the last few weeks line up in my head with a kind of horrible clarity. The nights out. The makeup. The careful clothes. The vague stories. Nina's reaction. The receipts. The restaurant reservation for 2. The text telling me not to worry while she spent the evening with someone else. All of it had been building to this. Not confusion. Not self-discovery. Not space. An affair. Maybe emotional at first. Maybe not. At that point, I didn't actually care which version would hurt less, because both of them ended in the same place. She had already stepped outside the relationship in her mind long before I caught up to it. The shower turned off. I stood up before I could talk myself out of it. When she came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel and rubbing water from her hair, she smiled at me automatically. That normal, easy little smile she still used sometimes out of habit. It disappeared the second she saw my face. I asked who Evan was. That was it. No speech. No accusation dressed up as a question. Just his name. For a second, I watched her do the math. I watched the exact moment she understood the wall between her 2 lives had finally cracked. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes moved once toward the dresser, then back to me. It was such a small glance, but it told me everything. She asked what I meant. And that was the second betrayal. Not because it shocked me, but because even then, right there, with the truth already bleeding through the room, her first instinct was still to manage me. So I repeated it. Who is Evan? She said he was just someone she knew. I actually laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so thin and insultingly small compared to everything I had swallowed to avoid this exact moment. I told her I'd seen the message. I told her I knew about the reservation. I told her I knew she hadn't been with Nina, and that I was done standing there pretending space meant anything other than what it had meant from the beginning. At first she tried to stay calm. She said I was invading her privacy. Said I was twisting things. Said I didn't understand the pressure she had been under, how lost she had felt, how disconnected from herself she had become. She kept reaching for that same language, the same soft words she had been using for weeks. Lost. Trapped. Numb. Needing to feel alive again. And that was when it hit me hardest. Not because she admitted nothing. Because even her explanation had no room for me as a person. I was just part of the background she was pushing against in her story about becoming herself again. Not her boyfriend. Not the man she had come home to every night while lying straight-faced about where she'd been. Just another witch she had decided was ruining her ability to feel free. So I asked the only thing that mattered. I asked if there had been a last time because there had been a first time. She went quiet. Then she sat down on the edge of the chair by the window, still wrapped in the towel, and stopped trying to argue with the facts. She didn't say everything all at once. It came out in pieces. Enough to confirm what I already knew, but never with the full honesty I deserved. Evan was someone she had met through a friend's birthday thing weeks earlier. They had kept talking. At first it was just talking, according to her. She said she felt seen by him in a way she hadn't felt in a while. Said there was excitement there. Lightness. No pressure. No history. I remember that word most. History. Like the life we built together had become some burden she could reduce to a single tired word. She admitted the dinners. The drinks. The messages. Then, eventually, the rest. Yes, something had happened. More than once. She said it in a broken, low voice, looking down at the floor instead of at me, and somehow that almost made it worse. Not because I needed eye contact. Because even then she still seemed more ashamed of being caught than of what she'd done. I asked her when she had planned to tell me. She didn't answer. That silence hurt more than the confession. Because it told me there had never been a plan. She wasn't on her way to honesty. She was on her way to whatever outcome let her keep the most control. If I stayed quiet and convenient, maybe she would keep both lives going a little longer. If things with him became real enough, maybe then she would tell me some cleaner version of the story where the relationship had already been dead and she had no choice but to leave. I suddenly saw the whole thing. The space speech had not been honesty. It had been setup. A softer word for distance. A respectable word for detachment. A way to start disappearing without having to answer for where she was going. I wish I could say I exploded. I wish I could say I made some speech so sharp it stayed with her for years. I didn't. I was just done. I told her we were finished. I told her she didn't get to keep using confusion as a blanket for betrayal. I told her if she wanted to feel like herself again, she could do it without me standing there pretending this was something noble. That finally got a real reaction out of her, not because she suddenly understood what she had done. Because the reality of losing the stable part of her life had hit all at once. She stood up, started crying, started saying she hadn't meant for it to go this far. Said she had been unhappy, but not unhappy with me exactly. Said she had felt disconnected from everything. Said she didn't know how to stop once it started. Said she had still cared about me. That last one almost turned my stomach. Still cared about me. People say things like that when they want credit for not being completely heartless. I didn't yell. I didn't comfort her either. I just stood there and listened until the words started repeating themselves. Then I asked her to pack a bag and leave for the night. She tried to slow the moment down. Asked if we could talk tomorrow. Asked if I was really ending 3 years over one mistake. One mistake. That phrase almost made me laugh again. I told her this hadn't been one mistake. It had been a chain of decisions, repeated so many times that she had started calling them freedom. She packed while crying quietly. That part was brutal in a completely different way. Watching someone fold pieces of their life into a bag while the room still looked like the room you shared that morning. Her charger still plugged in. Her coffee mug still in the sink. Her shoes by the door. Everything ordinary, except none of it was ordinary anymore. When she left, she paused like she wanted me to stop her. I didn't. The apartment became painfully quiet after that. Not peaceful. Not at first. Just stripped. Like a stage after the lights go down and all the props look cheap. I walked into the bathroom and saw her makeup still spread across the counter. I saw the damp towel. I smelled her shampoo in the air. And for the first time all night, I let myself feel the full weight of it. Not just that she had cheated. That she had been leaving me in slow motion, right in front of me, and asking me to call it understanding. The next few days were ugly in that numb, practical way breakups become when there's no room left for denial. She texted. Called. Said she wanted to explain better. Said she wanted one real conversation without anger. She even said Evan had not meant what I thought he meant, which by then was such a ridiculous lie that I didn't answer it at all. I kept my replies short when I replied at all. We arranged the basic things. Her stuff. Keys. Logistics. Every message from her seemed to circle the same idea without ever saying it plainly. She wanted the breakup to feel less final than what she had done deserved. I didn't give her that. Weeks later, I heard through someone else that she was officially seeing him. That should have hurt more than it did. By then it just made everything cleaner. It confirmed what I already knew. I had not lost her to confusion. I had lost her to a version of herself she chose piece by piece while looking me in the eye and asking for patience. That was the hardest lesson in all of it. Sometimes when someone says they need space, they really do mean healing. Sometimes they're overwhelmed, burned out, trying to reconnect with parts of themselves that got buried under life. And sometimes space is just the polite word they use while they practice living without you. I think that's what broke me the most in the beginning. Not the other man. Not even the lying. It was how long I stood there trying to be good, patient, supportive, while she turned my trust into cover. I don't hate her now. But I'll never forget how clearly the truth looked once I stopped listening to her words and started watching where her energy went. Because that was the whole story from the start. She said she needed space to feel like herself again. What she really meant was that she had already decided I wasn't part of the version she wanted to be.